we don't need to be fixed. We need to just figure out how our brain is wired. I look at laundry. That's a non-preferred task. I don't want to do laundry, but I need to do laundry. And so I'll use music and movement to literally dance my way through the laundry, which sounds kind of crazy. But I mean, that's how I move through the obstacle of doing a non-preferred task. And that's how we need to train our kids from a young age to come up against those things rather than allowing themselves to say, well, I can't do it, or it's too hard, or being encompassed by their paralysis, coming up against it with a different thought pattern, changing our thought life to move in the direction of, yes, I don't feel like doing it, but guess what? I can take control of this and I can put things into place that will make my body move in a direction of progress and growth.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. I have Katelyn Mabry today. I've known Katelyn for 4 or 5 years now. One of the first ADHD coaches in the biz that I met. And she also was a special education teacher and got her master's in reading. And we know that so many people with ADHD struggle with learning disabilities, especially dyslexia and reading. She's the author of Hi, It's Me, I Have ADHD, and the podcast host of Journey with Me Through ADHD. And it's a podcast for kids. She lives in Wisconsin with her husband and 4 young kids. And her passion is to speak into the hearts and minds of children and families with ADHD so they feel connected, supported, and understood. Welcome to Successful with ADHD, Katelyn.
Thanks so much for having me, Brooke.
Yeah. So you have a similar background to me in the sense of like you were in the special education field first. You had, you supported your people and then you moved into the coaching space. When did you learn that you had ADHD?
When I was 10 years old. So
okay.
It was one of my favorite stories that my parents tell me is they were sitting in the living room and I would get out of bed and I would run into the bathroom. And then I would run into the kitchen, and then I would run into, and they're like, oh, bless her heart. Like, I just could not sit still. I was all over.
Sure. Yeah.
And I would get, reports from school. Caitlin's a very sweet girl. She just can't seem to keep her mouth shut. She talks to all her friends in class. And I just had a hard time, staying focused in school. I had a hard time just in that environment as a whole, getting my work done, all
Sure.
those executive function things that at the time weren't named were a battle going on. So my parents decided to I did the whole gamut of testing and they told me, Katelyn, you have this thing called ADHD. And I was like, what does that mean? And they didn't know either in the 80s. Right.
Right.
And they were like, oh. So they did the best they could. My teachers did the best they could with what they knew, right? And so that kind of started my journey. And it was really something that was unspoken about oftentimes. Like they put things into place, but we didn't talk about it very often. So it did leave me with a lot of questioning and unintentional feelings of shame and what's wrong with me and why am I different in this way? So I just had a lot of questions that were stirring that then later on were answered. So that's my personal experience.
It's not common that girls get diagnosed at an elementary age because generally speaking, they're more the inattentive type or the combined. So the fact that you were diagnosed in 5th grade is surprising. And also, you would think that, okay, you learned you had ADHD. Great. Now let's get the accommodations and the support that you need in the school system so you can understand your unique brain wiring and thrive so you don't have this unintentional shame and feelings of failure. So would love to know, your parents didn't really talk much about it. And that was kind of how parents were back then, because you and I are in a similar age. Like I had a learning disability. I had an auditory processing disorder, and like they did not want the school to give me the services. They wanted to do it all privately. So, I wasn't seen as different in school. So yeah, no one really talked about it. So what was it like for you in school once you got that ADHD diagnosis?
Well, it was just this silent known thing. And I felt like it was something I remember wondering, do other kids have ADHD? And I remember wondering, it was almost like I felt like it was a secret between me and the teacher. I felt like it was something that was hidden, right? And it wasn't something I wanted to share with others, right? Because there was
No one
this
was talking about it.
nobody was talking about it, right? And I just didn't know what it all meant. And so I think, which is interesting, I love how I can look back and see what fuels my fire and my passion now. Because now I have this intense passion for making sure kids that are in my age group of when I got diagnosed, I don't want them to be left feeling unsure and feeling
Yeah.
like they don't know what's going on in their mind and emotions. I want to really ignite that empowerment in them to understand the way that their brilliant, beautiful brain is wired differently and to lean into their strengths as they navigate through those struggles, which is something I always kind of came up against my struggles, and strengths weren't really talked about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I always attached the struggle to the ADHD. And I think once I really was made aware of all of the incredible strengths and gifts that are also attached to my brain, I was like, oh my goodness, I really wish that I would have had the unconditional confidence to lean into these things at a younger age too, which is what drives what I do. So,
Yeah. So, light bulb moment. Now, fast forward 30 years, right, from when you were 10,
mhm.
people nowadays get the diagnosis, and hopefully the intent is to learn more about their ADHD and level the playing field in the class. So I'm just curious, going back to the question, like, besides the secret between you and your teacher, what happened in school?
Well, the nice thing is even with the lack of knowledge and understanding, my teachers did do the best they could to put things into place. And so in that sense, I felt very blessed. Like I felt like when I look back, they gave me charts, they let me move, they gave me, they did put things into place to help me succeed
Yeah,
the best that I could in that environment. But what part was really hard was navigating the social emotional part, right? And that was
100%.
never something that was addressed with it because it wasn't something that was originally attached to it when given the diagnosis. And so that's something, because people will say to me all the time, well, you've been diagnosed since you were 10, so you probably have it all figured out. Nope. Because
Nope.
yes, I was
Still
diagnosed
figuring
at
it out
10,
day by day.
still figuring it out today. All the time I have, aha moments on my own journey. So yeah. And I just remember now looking back, I did struggle with the social piece, and I would make friends quickly, but I had a hard time maintaining friendships, and I didn't know why. And I thought there was something wrong with me. And I thought, there was just so much attached to that. And number one thing I struggled with that I didn't have a name for until I was in my, early 20s was rejection sensitive dysphoria. Oh my goodness. My number one
Hmm.
symptom, I had no idea it had a name. And so,
Absolutely.
so it's one of those things where, yes, I knew I had it at 10, and, I knew I had it through those years, but there were so many layers that I didn't understand were attached to having
ADHD.
ADHD that I just thought there was something wrong with me. And so
Yeah.
that's what drives my coaching. I'm like, I want to make sure these kids shed the shame and they understand there isn't anything wrong with them. It's just that their brain is wired differently, and we need to respond to it and practice exercising and training our brain so that we can thrive with the way that we're wired.
Yeah. I love how you said that you had no problem making friends, right? You were very outgoing. You're still very outgoing. You put yourself in uncomfortable situations, maybe not reading social cues. And then it was hard for you to keep them. So,
Right.
can we talk more about that? Because I totally recognize everything you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Would love to know in your personal journey why it was so hard for you to keep friends, because I know that people listening can 100% relate to that.
Yeah, this is something that I still to this day I mean, friendships are hard, and friendships are one of those things that we don't attribute as something that can be hard on your ADHD journey, but it can. And it's something that, I mean, I'm super passionate about facilitating friendships for my kids and helping them navigate them at a young age so that they don't feel it. They don't feel like they're in the same position I am now at 40 years old, you know. But I think the reality is I think there's a few pieces to it. I'm very outgoing. I'm quick to make friends, but I think the keeping friends part is hard because I still do struggle with, you know, remembering to call back. I struggle with being late for things. I struggle with kind of being all over the board, you know, with conversations
Yeah.
and communications. And so, like, there's still some tendencies I have, and I'm still really discovering what friendship, what healthy, life-giving friendship looks like. And, you know, seeking after that tribe of like-minded individuals who will love me and build me up for who I am and not feel like I have to conform to, you know, who other people want me to be. So I think
Yeah.
it's a journey I'm still on to this day. So
Sure. Sure. So you're a 40-year-old. So for the kids and the parents listening, for their children, it takes a while to understand your brain, neurotypical or not, right? And our brain is still developing sometimes until the age of 30. And at that point in your 30s, you're discovering so much about yourself. And now you're 40 and you're like, okay, so maybe I've weeded out some of the people that aren't bringing me energy and aren't in my circle. But now, how do I navigate the new friends that I have, the friends that
right.
are like me, right? And if the friends are like you, where you guys forget to text each other
Yeah.
and you're all over the map, it's like, who reins in who, right?
Right. I know friendships are just hard. And I do this, or I talk about this with my own children and the kids that I coach, is just this whole idea of identifying, you know, types of friendships. So there's green light friends, yellow light friends, and red light friends. Peers, really. The red light's more of a peer that we want to steer clear of, right? But then there's a lot of times we tend to go into the yellow light zone where we're trying to, you know, people please, and we're trying to, like, you know, get that yellow light person to like us. And so a yellow light person might be someone who's nice, but we have to kind of have our
Be cautious.
caution sign with. That's why it's yellow. We have to be cautious with, because sometimes they'll turn their back on us, or they won't, you know, they'll say something, and it's not, doesn't make them a bad person, but it's just somebody that we have to, they might drain our energy battery, you know, and so it's somebody we have to be cautious of. And a lot of times we get so caught up, even as adults, in those yellow light friendships that we lose sight of our green light friends who are waiting in the balance. Like, they're there, right? And so I really think it's so important at a young age to help kids identify those green light friends that they, you know, and encourage them to invest in those friendships and to, you know, spend time in those friendships. I'm not saying you can't hang out with the yellow light friends, but it's just a matter of prioritizing, right? Prioritizing those green light, life-giving friendships.
Yeah. Now, a hard thing about being a child with ADHD, not only identifying those green light friendships, because very often we know who's nice to us and who's not. Like, yeah, it might be hard to read some social cues, but like, we know who wants to be our friends, like, genuinely, right?
Right.
But sometimes we don't want to be their friends, right? Because we are so focused on people who don't like us and having to please those people. So how do you stop the shame? And I forget the term that you used.
Shed the shame. Yep.
Shed the shame and accept who your friends are. And also sometimes, and this is a whole longer conversation, but sometimes the people who like us are very much like us, and they may or may not be a good influence on us, and they might not be the friends that we want to be friends with, right?
Right.
So how do we identify who are healthy friends for us?
Well, and I think that's where, especially for kids, that's where the parental facilitation is really helpful, right? Because I do think you're right. I mean, neurodivergent kids attract neurodivergent kids. That's just right. And it's a very common theme. But I think everything's a healthy balance, right? So I'm just saying that what we need to do is we need to make sure that time with your neurodivergent friends that could could be in the yellow light right now, right? Just with their developing skills as well, right?
Yeah.
Still foster those friendships, but also encourage maybe a more dynamic green light friendship that is refueling. So I feel like there's that balance, but that's where the facilitation is so important.
Yeah. So as special educators and people who were in the school system, I'm curious on your take. And for those listening, like, we know that the least restrictive environment for a child is always the first step. And when we say least restrictive, we mean the environments where it's not just throwing a ton of support at your child for unnecessary reasons. So we want to level the playing field, right? So you start with the least restrictive, which might be, an accommodation. Then you move into a service where it's pulled out. Then you might move into a push-in model. Then you might move into a self-contained. Then you might move into a private school for special education. Then you might move into a boarding school with it,
Right.
What are your thoughts socially, emotionally for a child with ADHD? And I know everyone's different, but to be in a collaborative classroom with neurotypical friends, right? Or be in a self-contained classroom with people who might be more similar to them.
I mean, honestly, in my background, I actually taught in a dual classroom, and I absolutely loved that model. So I had half of my children were neurodivergent and half of my children were neurotypical.
But that you were considered the special education teacher,
I was the
and you had
special
two
education
assistants.
teacher. Yes.
Fascinating. Was this in a public school?
It was. So I guess my point is I think it can be very valuable if you have a blend depending on the child's needs, right? Like, I think
Sure.
that, I mean, that's kind of the caveat to it. I think it just depends on, the child needs and how educated the teacher is as well. I think that's huge. And, making sure that the teacher understands the needs of the child, who is neurodivergent. Because the bottom line is our school system as is not conducive to the neurodivergent brain. It just isn't.
I hear you.
It's a fact, right?
I hear you.
I can
You
state
said
it,
not me.
It's not. And so, and as a teacher, I feel like I can say that because I went through school. I was a dual license major. So, I have my license in regular and special education. And how much did I learn about ADHD in college? Like, in my license?
0.
There was one chapter with one little blurb about ADHD, which is why that's when I wrote my book, was when that one class with one chapter on ADHD. That's how much we learn about it, right?
Yes.
And so, but the sad thing, the thing is, and this is where the gap is, because, parents are thinking, oh, well, teachers know. No,
they don't.
There's best teachers in the world. I am not trying to bash teachers at all.
Correct.
Phenomenal.
Correct.
Phenomenal teachers, but there's just a lack of understanding. I have had teachers reach out to me in tears. Katelyn, please tell me more. I feel so bad. I have been reacting to these kiddos in my classroom the wrong way. I need your help. And these are, passionate, wonderful teachers who just don't have the background knowledge and don't understand the layers of ADHD. And because it's so internal and because it's so mind, emotion, and full body experience for these kids, a lot of times the why behind what is being seen is missed.
Yes. And I think that I completely agree with you. We were talking about the ADHD conference in Baltimore. I was on the State of the Women panel, and I said that, there needs to be more education in the school system from people like you or me or whomever talking about ADHD. If this is one of the most common brain-based disorders, why aren't more people being educated about it?
Correct.
So My stepson, I have two stepsons. They both have ADHD. The younger one is very hyperactive. The older one is more of the inattentive type. The older one has a lot of empathy, a lot of social awareness, a lot like he's gifted. So he's thriving in this private school that we put him in. The younger one is not. And this private school is not meant for special education. They don't understand special education. And we're at a point where we know he needs to go, right? He needs to move to another school. And he's coming home hysterically crying, thinking that he's stupid, thinking that he is less than, and it's really wearing on his self-esteem when he's a gorgeous kid. He's great at soccer. He's very social, but the teachers don't understand him. Mm-hmm. So I can't spread this message more than what we're talking about. It's like, it is so important, school districts, to educate your teachers, your administration, even the ESE coordinators, right? Educate all of them, because we all need real-time information on what ADHD can look like in girls, what it could look like in boys, and then what do we do about it?
Right. Well, and with that, I that's why I want to speak into the hearts and minds of mamas and dads and, any caregiver out there of kiddos with ADHD. We have this opportunity to advocate for our kids in these classroom environments. Like, I think it's so important. Sometimes there's this disconnect and there's this assumption that it's being taken care of at school, and, there's a special ed team. I was a special ed teacher. I didn't know anything about ADHD, and I had it, but I wasn't educated in it, right? So I think it's so important that we continue to educate ourselves and have, see through that lens, that ADHD lens, and then impart that wisdom and that understanding on teachers, on, like, if you're going to do a referral for a 504 or an IEP, just making sure that we are getting every accommodation put into place for our child so they can thrive in that environment that's tricky for them to be in.
Yes, I've seen it both ways. I've seen teachers and guidance counselors and administration refer kids to special education at the first glimpse of a problem, right? And it might not be ADHD, it might not be a special education issue, it might just be something totally unrelated, right? So taking too much action or too little, right? Waiting for years down the road when the damage is already done. So It is so imperative, and we're not knocking teachers, we're not knocking school districts. We both were part of that, and we love school districts and have so much support for teachers because it is one of the hardest jobs. But you're not taught this in school. So appreciate you saying that. So tell me and tell our listeners about what you share in your book, so this way you can support and empower parents and children with ADHD.
Yeah. So my book, I was telling Brooke before we got on, this was the copy that I actually, it was a project I did for college. And my professor came running down the aisle and she was like, "You need to publish that book." And I was like, "What?" Like, this was just a project I did over the weekend. But this is a symbol of years of work and transformation in terms of my own imposter syndrome and my own, work on getting to the mindset of being enough to be an author and, feeling capable. But it's scary because within my book, my husband calls it my personal biography because it's about this little girl, and she's telling her friend all about this thing called ADHD that she has. And so, but the way she walks through it, I did it in hopes of shedding the shame, like I said, and just bringing to light some of the things you experience when you live with an ADHD brain. Like one page says, sometimes my feelings go up and down, and that's when my head spins round and round. It's very rhythmic. And so kids can really grab a hold of. I even have parents that are like, I love how this book is written because it totally makes sense. And it's like, yes, that's how I feel. And so that's just that whole idea of making sure kids feel seen, they feel understood, they feel heard. You know, there wasn't any books out there with actual kids in it about ADHD. All the little kid books were with characters like animals, which are super cute, right? But at the time that I wrote this book, I couldn't find anything with an actual child. And one of the biggest things, again, going back to my own childhood, I remember thinking, do any other kids have ADHD like me? And truth be told, my 11-year-old who's diagnosed, so I have 4 kids, 3 are officially diagnosed. The 4th is in question. I may have 4 neurodivergent children, which is perfectly fine because
you get what you can take, right?
Ride that journey right along with them.
Exactly.
But one of the first things she said when she was diagnosed, she said, Mom, who else has ADHD? Ooh. Kids want to know that they're not alone. They want to know that they're not the only one that is living with, this different wired brain. Right. And so even when you describe it as beautiful and wonderful and, there's so many gifts and strengths attached to it, even though there's some things that are tricky, you can say all those things, but if they still feel alone in it, it still feels kind of like, So that's why on my podcast, I have kids come on so that kids can hear from other kids. Right. Because then
I love that.
There's that connection like, oh, that's how I feel. Oh, he thinks that way too. The purpose of my book and my podcast is just to really shed light on, some of the different ways that we feel that we're not alone in how we feel, some strategies and techniques to, work through some of those big, intense emotions going 0 to 100. One of the pages say, then I see other kids like me and know I'm not alone. And so I just tried to weave all of those messages in there in a very simple way. And as a conversation starter for parents. So my book and my podcast are really meant to ignite conversation and communication in a really positive way for children and their parents and their trusted adults.
I love that. It's so important for us to be able to identify with a figure that we look alike, right? Or, can connect with. And that's why so many people, who are soccer players, let's say, I'm just thinking that because I'm in a soccer family. You could see my face. I don't love soccer, but they love like Messi because they can see themselves in Messi, right? So they want to be the next Lionel Messi. So they watch all of his stuff. And you're really the face for children with ADHD. Like you're bringing this into your podcast, into your book. And I so appreciate that because literally, if you could shed the shame earlier on in life, think about all the trauma, all the shame that will be avoided so much earlier. Period.
Yeah, the biggest gift we can give our kids, right?
Yes, exactly. So where would you say that you are now as a 40-year-old with ADHD who's known she's had ADHD for 30 years, is in a family of neurodivergent family members, has taught neurodivergent people, coaches neurodivergent people, has a podcast, has a book. Where are you now in your journey, do you think?
The bottom line is I would identify myself as a mama, a coach, a wife, a teacher who is on a journey of lifelong learning. I'm never going to arrive. I'm never going to have it all figured out. And I think that's where a lot of my strength comes from in my coaching, is that I can show up as my authentic self and say, hey, I still go 0 to 100 too, but this is how I move through it differently now. Right? Like, and that's the thing. I think that's a big, huge takeaway, is that we don't need to be fixed. We need to just figure out how our brain is wired so that we can respond to it better. It's never going to be perfect. We're always going to be a work in progress.
Right. And to focus on the strengths that you were mentioning, right? Like just leveling that playing field so we make it easier and fair for us.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, is like recognizing your strengths and moving through your struggles with your strengths. So like, I know I have an urgent craving, dopamine seeking, like novelty, driven brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know, I mean, I have trained myself now as a 40-year-old. I used to, in my 30s, I was kind of messy. I didn't have, my house was kind of in a disarray. Like I was just kind of, living, my brain was in my space. Well, now, I mean, through the years, so in the last 10 years especially, I've really done a lot of work. And that's why the practice piece is so huge. I have practiced the tools and strategies that work best for my brain, starting with my thought life. And I've moved myself into a place of recognizing when I need momentum. I look at laundry. That's a non-preferred task. I don't want to do laundry, but I need to do laundry so that
Do you know anyone who wants to do the cycle, the full cycle of laundry? Come on.
Nope, not one person.
Yeah.
And that's just, I knew that was a relatable topic for an adult, right? But I'll look at it, I'll come up against this task, and instead of saying, I'm not going to do that, right? Which is what my brain wants to do. It's almost like you have to
trick your brain.
You have to trick your brain. I'll put in my earbuds because music's my momentum maker. I'll stay on my feet because I love movement. And so I'll use music and movement to literally dance my way through the load of laundry, which sounds kind of crazy. But I mean, that's how I move through the obstacle of doing a non-preferred task. And that's how we need to train our kids from a young age to come up against those things rather than allowing themselves to say, well, I can't do it, or it's too hard, or being encompassed by their paralysis, coming up against it with a different thought pattern, right? Changing our thought life to move in the direction of, yes, I don't feel like doing it, but guess what? I can take control of this, and I can put things into place that will make my body move in a direction of progress and growth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What would you say to the students listening here, or the parents of the students listening here, who are in the beginning of their ADHD journey? One piece of advice that you can share to guide them.
I think the biggest thing is take it one day at a time, one step at a time. For parents, I would say recognize whether you are reacting to the behavior versus responding to the why. Starting at home, we need to look at the behavior as every behavior is either an unmet need or lagging skill. And so recognizing it is such yourself so that you can then advocate for that in the school. And you'll be amazed at how kids will respond so much differently. In terms of kiddos, I think the biggest thing is to recognize the things you can control and can't control, and lean into what you can control and rest your unconditional confidence in the effort you put in the mindset you take on. I like to call it thought life, because you can control your thought life. It's like what are you allowing to live inside your head? What do you need to kick out of the door? And what do you need to invite in, right?
Or what do you need to just accept as is, right? And then move on. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, we could go on and on all day about, recognizing when, those different internal executive function skills are tricky, like mental transitions, flexible thinking, like some of those things that can really tie us up, that rejection sensitivity, where it's showing up. So just to start being in tune, because the first steps of growth is awareness. And so I would say just starting with the step of becoming more aware of the things that are showing up as tricky in, your home and school environments, so that you can take those things on one step at a time as you celebrate your strengths and gifts.
Love it. Love it. Every time I ask someone with ADHD, what's the one thing? There's like 10 things. I know that's...
I know. Well,
it's a bad question. It's a bad question. I think I need to work on that one. Anyway, if someone wants to find you, Katelyn, where is the best place for them to look for you?
So they can go to my website, www.katelynmabry.com, and that's kind of my hub. So they can get to my podcast from there. I'm primarily on Instagram for social media. So they can follow me on Instagram. They can get to my book. They can order my book from there. They can contact me from there too. So I'm always looking for guests on my podcast. I'm super excited to have Brooke on my podcast soon. But if there's ever any willing children, I always love to have kids' voices speaking, the truth about their ADHD journey on my podcast, because it just really
that's really cool.
Light.
Have you had your kids on your podcast?
Mm-hmm.
Your children?
They love it.
Awesome.
They're so funny. They're that's like, awesome. We're famous. Yes, you are.
It's huge. Yes, you are, honey. All right. Well, Katelyn, it's always a pleasure to see your face. I look forward to talking tomorrow on your podcast. And thank you for shedding light and spreading awareness for parents, for children, for adults with ADHD. It's so important.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helped you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.